To bleed for the Emperor is a duty, but to endure beyond the ruin of the flesh is a supreme and terrible honor. Across the vast and warring galaxy, the sarcophagus of the Castra Ferrum dreadnought stands as a monument to holy defiance. Within its blessed adamantium shell, a ruined hero slumbers in reverent stasis, awaking only to unleash the Emperor's wrath upon the enemies of mankind. To these ancient champions, the sacred mantra is spoken with absolute reverence. Even in death, I still serve. Yet this eternal service is not a fundamental right of the Adeptus Astartes. It is a rare privilege, an unyielding grace bestowed only upon the most honored fallen who have shattered their bodies in glorious martyrdom. For the loyalist, this mechanical entombment is a sacred communion with the machine spirit, a righteous continuation of their vows. But in the dark spaces between the stars, where the ruinous powers hold sway, such noble sacrifice is twisted into an abominable mockery. There is no honor within the iron womb of a chaos Helbrute. There is only the profane reality of a flesh prison, a screaming agony where the boundary between mortal terror and warp-infused machinery dissolves into madness. Upon a shattered world, beneath skies choked with the ashes of a billion dead, a broken warrior learns this bitter truth. His ceramite is cracked, his twin hearts beat in a labored rhythm, and his limbs are rendered utterly inert by catastrophic spinal trauma. Though his gene-enhanced biology works frantically to clot his catastrophic wounds, he remains completely and utterly conscious. To a space marine, such defeat on the field of battle is a profound failure. In this paralyzed ruin, death is craved not out of despair, but as a final victorious release from dishonor. He waits for the killing blow, for the Emperor's peace to sever his connection to this ruined shell. It does not come. Heavy, spiked ceramite boots crush the blood-soaked earth as massive silhouettes loom over his immobile form. These are the heretic Astartes, traitors to the Golden Throne, and they look down upon their fallen cousin without a shred of martial respect. To the eyes of chaos, a paralyzed space marine is not a brother to be granted a swift end, nor a foe to be honored in death. He is raw biological material. He is a prize of war. The true horror dawns within the mind of the captive as coarse chains are wrapped around his shattered battleplate. There will be no holy dreadnought sarcophagus to welcome his broken form, and there will be no mercy of a swift death. He is dragged away from the light of the burning world, hauled into the suffocating darkness of a traitor warship. Every brutal scrape across the rusted deck plating carries him further from the Emperor's grace. He descends deep into the mechanical bowels of the vessel, where the tortuous surgical theatres of the Dark Mechanicum await their newest helpless sacrifice. To the Adeptus Astartes, power armor is not merely an implement of war. It is a holy extension of the self, a second skin granted by the Emperor. Through the miraculous neurofiber lattice of the black carapace, cold ceramite and living flesh are woven into a single, indivisible entity. To remove this shell without the proper rites is to flay the warrior alive. The heretics of the Dark Mechanicum know this intimately. They approach the bound loyalist not just to disarm him, but to shatter his mind. Rusted mechatendrils, weeping with chaotic scrap code and necrotic plagues, descend upon the paralyzed giant. They do not chant the litanies of unbinding. They do not soothe the agitated machine spirit. Instead, they plunge industrial rock saws and jagged pry bars directly into the sacred environmental seals of his battleplate. Sparks rain down upon the blood-stained slab as the dark chirurgeons begin their methodical, sadistic work. In the sanctified armories of the Imperium, the removal of a Space Marine's panoply is a ceremony of absolute reverence. Tech Marines anoint the interface ports with sacred unguents. Choirs of chapter serfs sing hymns of integration while the armor's machine spirit is gently coaxed into a state of slumber. The neural bonds are severed with surgical grace and deep spiritual respect. It is a communion born of harmony between the transhuman warrior and the holy machine. Here, in the corroded bowels of the traitor stronghold, there is only pure violation. The dark chirurgeons rip the overlapping ceramite plates away with brute hydraulic force. They deliberately ignore the shrieking warning runes and the frantic pulsing of the armor's life support cogitators. Each violent tear forcibly snaps the neural umbilicus connecting the warrior to his war gear. The Astartes does not merely feel the physical rending of metal from flesh. He suffers catastrophic psychic feedback. His mind is instantly flooded with the dying, corrupted agony of his armor's machine spirit as it is violently infected by scrap code. The sudden, brutal severance sends blinding shockwaves through his nervous system. It is a psychological desecration that violently strips away his sense of invincibility. For the first time since his ascension from mere mortality, the warrior is plunged into a profound and terrifying vulnerability. Thick neural cables are ruthlessly yanked from the ports embedded in his spine, spraying genetically enhanced blood across the rusted grating. The massive chest plate is pried open with a deafening screech of tortured plasteel. The sacred Imperial aquila is fractured into jagged shards and cast carelessly into the filth of the floor. The armor that has protected him across 100 worlds is reduced to butchered scrap. Stripped of his protective shell and his identity as an untouchable angel of death, the sheer reality of his helplessness finally takes hold. The cold, plague-tainted air of the profane flesh forge bites fiercely at his bare, augmented muscles. He is left completely unarmored, an exposed monument of pure post-human biology waiting in the gloom beneath the twitching, rusted scalpels of his captors. Stripped of his ceramite shell, the Adeptus Astartes is nothing but a mountain of exposed transhuman muscle bound to a defiled surgical slab. His torturers do not grant him the mercy of a swift execution. This is a place devoid of martial honor, a subterranean slaughterhouse where the sacred gifts of the Emperor are systematically undone. The heretics circle him like mechanized carrion scavengers, chanting atonal scrap prayers to their dark patrons. Their vox emitters broadcast overlapping dirges that harmonize with the revving engines of heavy chain cleavers and the erratic, high-pitched hum of rusted thermal cutters. No anesthetic is offered, nor would it be accepted. The loyalist is forcibly immobilized, his unblinking eyes forced to watch the brutal instruments designed to dismantle his God-wrought physiology. The first cut is not clinical, but a ragged, tearing act of utter butchery. The jagged teeth of a heavy chain cleaver bite deeply into the dense musculature of his right shoulder. Transhuman flesh parts in ruined ribbons. The immense, rock-like durability of his osmodular-enhanced skeleton only serves to prolong the agony, turning what should be a swift dismemberment into an arduous, grinding excavation of bone and marrow. Sparks dance wildly across the rusted blades as they chew through his augmented collarbone. The shrill, mechanical whine of the bone saws echoes endlessly through the damp iron chamber, cutting through the heavy chanting. Yet the loyalist maintains his psycho-indoctrinated silence. He will not give his defilers the satisfaction of a single scream. His jaw clenches with enough force to shatter mortal teeth, his immense will focused solely on enduring the absolute violation. With a sickening, resonant crack, the right arm is severed completely and tossed unceremoniously into a rust-caked trough. The arterial spray paints the rusted walls in broad, crimson strokes, yet the dark chirurgeons make no effort to staunch the catastrophic blood loss, knowing the transhuman biology will soon answer the trauma. A thick, coppery stench fills the air, which the surrounding cultists inhale like sacred incense. They meticulously mirror the ruinous process on his left arm, ripping away the mighty limbs that have crushed Xeno's skulls and held the line against the encroaching dark for centuries. The dark liturgies grow louder, rising into a fanatic crescendo of blasphemy as the butchers drag their heavy tools toward his lower extremities. Massive circular saws, their teeth slick with holy blood, are brought to bear against his armor-thick thighs. The Laraman cells within his veins fight a desperate localized war to clot the grievous trauma, instantly sealing the catastrophic arterial breaches and violently denying him the mercy of bleeding out. Great slabs of genetically perfected muscle and fused bone are carved away in agonizing increments. The pain is absolute, tearing through his enhanced nervous system like a localized warp storm. He watches, fully conscious, as his own legs are severed at the hip joints and dragged away through the pooling gore. What was once a towering, unstoppable avatar of humanity's righteous fury has been violently reduced to a bleeding, mutilated core. He is now nothing more than a helpless torso strapped to cold, unforgiving iron. In the ultimate, cruelest irony, it is his own indomitable superhuman vitality that ensures he survives the butchery. His dual hearts beat on with steady, defiant thuds, pumping oxygenated blood through a ruined vessel that violently refuses to grant him the sweet release of death. The echo of the agonizing severing fades into a profound and suffocating silence. Yet there is no release into the merciful void of death. For a mortal man, such catastrophic trauma would yield an instant and blessed end. The shock alone would shatter the mind, while the torrential loss of blood would drain the life from the flesh in mere seconds. But this is no mere mortal. This is a space marine, an Adeptus Astartes forged by the Emperor's own genetic alchemy. Within his ruined torso lies a biological marvel designed to cheat the Reaper himself. Deep within his chest cavity, the Laraman's organ awakens to answer the catastrophic damage inflicted upon him. This sacred gland unleashes a torrent of engineered biological agents into his rapidly depleting bloodstream, a grim testament to the Emperor's genetic mastery. These hyper-efficient cellular agents flood his bloodstream, carried instantly to the ruined stumps of his shoulders and thighs. Upon contact with the open air, the Laraman cells weave a sudden and impenetrable layer of hyperclotted tissue. The violent crimson spray from his amputations slows, thickens, and violently seals into grotesque mounds of dark, hardened scar tissue. What was intended as the ultimate gift of survival has been orchestrated into an unspeakable curse. His own transhuman resilience becomes his most relentless torturer. His biology vehemently refuses to let him perish, overriding his desperate desire for oblivion. He is forced to remain agonizingly conscious, perfectly aware of his own total dismemberment. The ravaged nerves in his severed stumps scream with infinitely firing signals. They broadcast the fiery agony of ghost limbs that have been dragged away into the dark, a phantom torment that drowns his mind in an ocean of inescapable suffering. He is reduced to a helpless torso, shivering in the cold dampness of the surgical slab. Through eyes dilated with sheer, unadulterated terror, he stares down at the sealed, bloody mounds where his limbs used to be. He was created to be a mighty weapon of the Imperium, the very instrument of the master of mankind. Now he is stripped of his edge, rendered utterly impotent, yet perfectly and horribly aware of his degradation. The Larriman's organ has done its duty flawlessly. It has denied him the sweet, dark release of a warrior's death. It traps his soul within a ruined cage of meat and bone. His twin hearts pound furiously against his ribs, stubbornly sustaining a life that has been stripped of all martial dignity. Every ragged breath he draws is a bitter testament to an engineered biology that demands survival at the absolute cost of sanity. The bleeding finally ceases entirely, locking the agony inside his crippled form. His vital signs stabilize in a grotesque, mocking parody of natural healing. He cannot move, he cannot strike, and above all, he cannot die. The living torso remains anchored to the slab, a perfectly preserved conduit of absolute agony waiting in the stillness. In the suffocating gloom, unseen hands now gather to prepare his stabilized remnants. The stubborn flesh has been mastered, and the broken vessel is fully primed to receive its true confinement. There is no mercy in the silence that follows the brutal harvest of limbs. Only the suffocating realization that the captive has been preserved for a fate far worse than mere execution. Before the stabilized, bleeding torso of the fallen hero, a shadow is drawn forth from the deeper gloom of the infernal armory. It is not a sterile instrument of war, but a starving, metallic womb. This is the empty chassis of a Helbrute. To gaze upon its open sarcophagus is to look into the jaws of an apex predator that has been denied its meat for a millennium. Where an honored dreadnought of the Emperor offers a sanctified tomb of amniotic purity and serene slumber, this profane construct promises only endless waking agony. Its rusted, jagged interior is slick with a wet, necrotic sheen. Thick, fleshy cables droop from the dark recesses like the exposed veins of a flayed leviathan. The air in the chamber grows incredibly heavy, thick with the suffocating stench of ancient oxidized blood and rancid, warp-tainted ozone. Deep within the cavernous chest plate, biomechanical muscles twitch and spasm in blind, desperate anticipation of a living host. These synthetic sinews slither against scorched adamantium, weeping noxious fluids as they wait to fuse with fresh, terrified nerve endings. A low, hungry hum reverberates from its corrupted power plant. It is a hateful resonance that vibrates through the exposed bone and marrow of the captive warrior, pulsing with the malicious intent of the immaterium itself. The sarcophagus is not merely a mechanical receptacle, it is a sentient parasite waiting to devour a noble soul. Gazing upon this dripping, meat-lined cavity, the crippled loyalist feels the first true, paralyzing pangs of existential dread. He has stood steadfast against demons and monstrous Xenos without a sliver of fear, yet this creeping horror shatters the rational bounds of his gene-forged mind. He understands, in a sudden rush of cold terror, that the machine is actively salivating at his proximity. The warped, demon-forged metal expands and contracts in a grotesque approximation of breath. Its iron ribs part wider to reveal a maw of barbed sensory nodes and rusted, jagged interface spikes. These cruel instruments do not gracefully connect a pilot to a war engine. They are designed to impale the conscious mind, anchoring the victim to a localized purgatory of perpetual torment and sensory overload. The guttural chanting of the dark artisans rises over the hungry, grinding growl of the idling plasma reactor. Heavy, segmented mechadendrites descend from the blackened stone of the vaulted ceiling, their iron claws brutally closing around the mutilated, helpless torso of the captive. There is no reverence or dignity in this elevation. He is handled not as an honored ancient of the Adeptus Astartes, but as a pitiful slab of raw, bleeding meat being offered to a starving beast. Slowly, inexorably, the grinding hoist begins to pivot on its rusted track. The loyalist is hoisted higher, carried through the stagnant, incense-choked air, suspended helplessly above the stained deck. He is brought face to face with his new prison, drifting forward until his ruined body hovers directly before the open, fleshy maw of the Helbrute sarcophagus as it yawns wide to receive its agonizing communion. The descent into damnation begins. Suspended by rusted iron chains that bite deeply into his mutilated shoulders, the limbless torso of the loyalist is lowered toward the yawning maw of the sarcophagus. He is a veteran warrior stripped entirely of his agency, a once proud son of the Emperor reduced to a bleeding component for a profane engine. Below his suspended form awaits the amniotic reservoir of the chaotic chassis. In the sacred apothecarion of his chapter, a wounded battle brother is carefully anointed with holy unguents. Those blessed oils are cool, sterile, and fragrant with the sacred incense of ancient terror. They are meticulously prepared to preserve the pure engineered flesh of the Adeptus Astartes in honored stasis. What waits for this captive hero is a sickening blasphemy against everything the master of mankind ever wrought. The surface tension of the rancid demonic gel breaks as his scarred mass makes first contact. It is an immediate and catastrophic sensory violation. The fluid is unnaturally thick, possessing a putrid sentience that throbs in time with a malefic heartbeat. As he is lowered further, the viscous substance creeps upward along his flayed skin like a hungry living organism. This dark sludge offers no salvation or numbing mercy to his grievous wounds. Instead, it actively invades them. He endures the sickening sensation of wet, pulsating, corrupted tissue wrapping tightly around his pure flesh. Vile tendrils of necrotic biology slither aggressively against his severed stumps, seeking the exposed marrow of his shattered bones. The heat within the amniotic tank is utterly suffocating. It does not possess the sterile, regulated warmth of a standard life-support incubator. It burns with the feverish, cloying heat of a predatory beast's belly, a hellish core radiating pure malice. With every shallow, agonizing breath, the trapped warrior draws in a deeply noxious miasma. The cramped air of the sarcophagus is choked with the sharp tang of warp-forged ozone and the suffocating sting of sulfur. Yet beneath these foul chemical odors lies a psychic toxin that is far worse. It is the palpable stench of unadulterated terror. Centuries of previous victims have withered and died in this very slime, their eternal screaming permanently absorbed into the thick fluid. He breathes the concentrated fear of ancient murdered souls, a relentless sensory assault that violently overrides his psycho-indoctrinated mind. The gelatinous mass eventually swallows his torso entirely. Pulsating organic membranes shift in the claustrophobic dark, adhering tightly to his chest and fusing maliciously with the black carapace beneath his skin. The dark entity of the machine breathes in tandem with him, forcing a parasitic rhythm that threatens to overwrite the steady beating of his twin hearts. He is fully submerged within the profane womb of the Helbrute. The demonic fluid seals him inside an inescapable embrace of unending agony and profound madness. His biological integration into the chaotic gel is complete, leaving him as a trapped, living battery within the belly of a mechanical nightmare. Now that his organic core is firmly seated within the rancid depths, the dreadnought engine demands its physical toll. The dormant architecture of the unholy walker hungers for absolute, permanent dominion over his mind and body. Cold iron and cruel steel wait impatiently in the shadows of the sarcophagus to claim his nervous system. Beneath the surface of the tainted amniotic filth, the true defilement begins. Sentient mecha tendrils, barbed and hungry, slither through the viscous biogel with predatory grace. These are no mere surgical implements. They are living parasites forged of rusted iron and malicious intent, seeking the exposed ridges of the loyalist's spine. They writhe in the darkness of the chassis, guided by a singular blasphemous purpose. Their target is the black carapace, the crowning achievement of the Emperor's genetic alchemy. In a pure Adeptus Astartes, this subdermal membrane is a sacred bridge between the warrior and his war gear. It is the miraculous organ that allows a space marine to interface seamlessly with his power armor, turning dead ceramite into a living, feeling second skin. Through its neural pathways, a loyal son of the Emperor experiences the weight, the power, and the tactile reality of his battle plate. It is a physiological masterpiece of unity and control. The heretics of the Dark Mechanicum view this holy symbiosis not as a divine gift, but as a fatal vulnerability, a profane gateway waiting to be violently exploited. They do not wish to interface with the warrior. They wish to possess him. The rusted cables strike out through the gel, latching onto the exposed neural ports of the carapace with merciless force. Jagged iron claws pry open the sacred sockets, tearing through scar tissue and fused vertebrae to reach the delicate spinal tissue beneath. The Astartes biology rebels instantly. His hyper-engineered immune system surges to fight the invasion, but it is entirely useless against the sorcerous intrusion of the warp. Vile parasitic wires burrow directly into his central nervous system. As the physical connection is violently secured, the cables begin to pulse with a sick, unholy light. They inject raw, burning, demonic scrap code straight into his cerebral cortex. This is a biodigital plague of the highest magnitude, a shrieking chorus of corrupted scrap code and warp-spawned malice. The physical agony defies mortal comprehension. Millions of raw nerve endings are forcefully fused with jagged, chaotic wire, searing the flesh from the inside out. The scrap code burns through his synapses like acid, melting his memories and overwriting his biological defenses with cold, mechanical hatred. Every instinct, every conditioned reflex of the Adeptus Astartes is systematically hunted down and destroyed by the sentient virus. The warrior's nervous system screams in a silent frequency, trapped beneath the gel as his very soul is digitized and fractured. The parasitic tendrils drink his pain, expanding deeper into his spinal column, replacing his organic pathways with conduits of rusted iron and corrupted copper. His sovereign mind is shattered into a billion weeping fragments. The neural link is now absolute. His body is no longer his own, but a captive battery, an open and bleeding conduit for the will of the daemonic machine. The violation of his nervous system is now absolute. As the burrowing cables finally fuse with his spinal column, a new and terrible truth dawns upon the captive mind. He expects the cold, mechanical thrum of a standard plasma reactor to dictate the lifeblood of this metallic prison. Instead, he feels only a gaping spiritual void, an abyssal hunger radiating from the heart of the corrupted engine. The machine is not waiting for a volatile fuel sequence to initiate. It is waiting for him to break. The realization strikes with sickening clarity as his twin hearts hammer frantically against his shattered ribs. This blasphemous chassis is not fueled solely by promethium or atomics. Its true motive force is derived from his terror. Every erratic spike of adrenaline, every chemical surge of visceral panic is instantly devoured by the sentient umbilicals threaded through his raw flesh. He is trapped within a parasitic feedback loop of pure warp-forged design. The demon engine is gorging itself upon his psychic agony, siphoning the raw spiritual output of a transhuman psyche pushed to the precipice of madness. He tries to assert the legendary mental discipline of the Adeptus Astartes, desperately attempting to calm his raging pulse and slow his breathing. He recites the litanies of focus in his mind, trying to starve the beast of its wretched sustenance. But the corrupted augmetics bypass his conscious control entirely. The parasitic machine floods his bloodstream with synthetic stimulants and alchemical horrors, ensuring his agony remains perpetually fresh and agonizingly volatile. When his mind screams silently in the suffocating darkness, the visual senses of the Helbrute flare with unnatural predatory life. When he thrashes in absolute unnatural dread against his agonizing neural restraints, the devastating weapon systems outside his fleshy tomb whine with building energetic fury. His profound suffering is the spark, his endless despair is the current. The harder he struggles to pull his mind free from the invasive tendrils, the more devastating power he feeds directly into the monstrous construct. He has been reduced from an exalted noble champion of the Emperor to a pathetic biological battery, a generator fueled exclusively by unyielding trauma. The traitors of the warp have engineered a flawless masterpiece of psychological torment, a cage that ensures the host remains forever balanced on the razor edge of total mental collapse. If he surrenders to the suffocating pain, the engine eagerly consumes his soul. If he fights the agonizing intrusion, his very defiance powers the instruments of slaughter that will be turned against his loyal brothers. There is no tactical retreat, and there is no escape from this meticulously engineered martyrdom. The psychic resonance of his unending nightmare courses through the circulatory tubing, replacing holy machine oils with the foul sludge of weaponized agony. The dark pact between screaming flesh and corrupted iron is completely realized. With the internal power cycle fully charged by his unrelenting terror, the inner sanctum of the walker readies itself for the final, inescapable threshold. The heavy, rusted mechanisms of his permanent entombment slowly begin to grind into motion. The feast of terror reaches its zenith just as the heavy ceramite doors of the dreadnought chassis begin their final agonizing descent. Driven by the grinding protest of rusted, blood-lubricated gears, the iron jaws of the sarcophagus close upon the mutilated space marine. Centuries of warp-tainted grime flake from the immense hinges as they pivot inward. With every fraction of an inch the metal advances, the oppressive reality of his entombment compounds. There is a sickening squelch of fusing flesh as the jagged interior clamps directly into his remaining organic mass. Pneumatic locks engage with the deafening, unyielding finality of a sealing stasis vault. The thick plasteel slab slams shut, severing the last meager sliver of ambient light from the outside galaxy. Absolute, suffocating darkness consumes the fallen hero. He is plunged into an abyss so total that his ruined ocular nerves misfire, painting phantoms of static across his blindness. The physical compression is unimaginable, a crushing weight that rivals the gravity of a dying star. Dense coils of writhing cables, synthetic muscle fibers, and brutal invasive augmetics swell to fill the tiny void. They press down upon his shattered anatomy until he cannot draw a natural breath. His ruined lungs flutter weakly against a rigid, unyielding barrier of encroaching iron. He is pinned entirely within a lightless meat cage, stripped of every physical autonomy he once wielded in the name of the Golden Throne. Not a single muscle fiber can twitch without the explicit, agonizing permission of the engine that now wears his body. The sensation of claustrophobic terror is magnified 1,000-fold by his superhuman physiology. His transhuman biology desperately floods his severed arteries with combat stimulants, fueling a violent physiological rage that has nowhere to go. Escape is no longer just a fleeting hope, it is a mathematical and biological impossibility, a concept utterly burned to ash in the crucible of his confinement. He is buried alive within a walking tomb. He is trapped in a state of perpetual, conscious suffocation where even the merciful release of death has been meticulously engineered out of his existence. The silence of the sealed sarcophagus is unspeakably heavy. It is broken only by the synthetic thud of the amniotic pumps and the frantic, trapped pounding of his own twin hearts. He strains against the absolute paralysis, his mind screaming desperate commands to limbs that have long since been amputated or fused to the corrupted chassis. It is the pure, distilled horror of eternal captivity, a sensory deprivation so profound it threatens to shatter his transhuman sanity into jagged shards. Yet, as the suffocating blackness threatens to claim his mind entirely, the stifling atmosphere inside the shell begins to shift. The cold iron of the prison feels less like a sterile void and more like a breathing lung. In the absolute dark, where his thoughts should be the only remnant of consciousness, a sickening, psychic pressure brushes against his soul. He realizes with mounting dread that the abyssal silence of his metal coffin is a grotesque lie. Something else is waking up in the dark with him. The absolute blackness of the sealed sarcophagus is not an empty tomb. It is a cage built for two. As the heavy adamantium locks grind into their final resting place, the loyalist finds himself suspended in the suffocating amniotic dark. His psycho-indoctrinated mind seeks the familiar protocols of martial meditation to combat the encroaching sensory deprivation. Instead, he feels the agonizing pressure of a presence that defies all logic and sanity. He is not alone inside the iron shell. Bound within the very circuitry and metallic sinew of the dreadnought chassis is a creature of the Empyrean. It is the dreadnought's corrupted machine spirit, a demonic entity of pure coalesced hatred, waiting patiently for its mortal host. There is no glorious battle of wills. There is no stoic resistance against the creeping corruption. The psychic breach is instantaneous and absolute. The veteran space marine, a warrior who has stood unbroken against the worst horrors of the physical galaxy, is violently submerged into a screaming void of warp-born malice. It is a profound and terrifying drowning. The malefic animus pours into his consciousness like an ocean of burning acid, washing away decades of hypnotherapy, duty and honor in a single agonizing tide. Every memory of his battle brothers, every prayer to the Golden Throne, is shattered under the crushing psychic weight of an eternal and formless rage. He tries to scream his defiance, but his physical mouth has been severed from his control, and his psychic voice is instantly swallowed by the roaring laughter of the Neverborn. The entity does not seek a symbiotic partnership. It desires only complete subjugation, tearing through the fortified architecture of the Adeptus Astartes mind with the casual brutality of a cosmic predator dissecting its prey. The warrior experiences centuries of phantom agony in the span of a single mortal heartbeat. His soul is stretched across the ethereal rack of the immaterium, subjected to the impossible geometry and relentless torment of the warp. The sheer magnitude of the ancient hatred possessed by the demon crushes the last fragile barriers of his sanity. This is the true death of his independence. It is not the sudden, merciful release of a bolter shell or the glorious end of a chainsword duel, but the slow, agonizing obliteration of the self. The noble champion who entered the sarcophagus ceases to exist as an individual, his identity dissolving completely into the swirling vortex of demonic hunger. What remains is merely a fractured, weeping remnant of a mortal soul, chained forever to the steering yoke of a mechanical nightmare. Flesh and metal and immaterial sorcery weave together in a profane and unholy trinity. The psychological fusion reaches its horrific zenith, binding the broken mortal to the immortal fiend. Deep within the massive armored chest cavity, corrupted plasma reactors finally ignite with a sickly, sputtering roar. Pneumatic limbs twitch violently as the beast tests its new mechanical muscles. A heavy, metallic shudder runs through the entirety of the defiled dreadnought frame. The newly forged abomination stirs from its forced slumber, and its primary optical sensors snap open to flood the ruined world with a baleful crimson light. There is a sacred reverence in the interment of a loyalist space marine. For the honored ancients of the Adeptus Astartes, the sarcophagus is a place of cold and quiet slumber. They drift in a dreamless void, preserved in stasis, until the chapter calls upon their wrath once more. The Helbrute knows no such mercy. For the shattered soul now bound within this iron tomb, there is no sleep, no numbness, and no escape. Awareness does not return slowly, but strikes with the catastrophic violence of a detonating sun. Instantaneous overstimulation tears through the ruined remnants of the Space Marine's biological mind. The amniotic fluid that suspends his fused remains does not soothe, but rather seethes with malefic energy. Deep within the armored shell, the dreadnought's corrupted plasma reactor flares to life. With every deafening synthetic heartbeat of that dark engine, a fresh wave of agony floods his nervous system. The raw motive force of the machine burns exactly like acid injected directly into his veins. He feels the scorching heat of exhaust vents as if they were his own lungs. He feels the grinding friction of adamantium gears as if his very bones are being crushed and reset with every microsecond. Then, the optical sensors bleed into the host's fractured consciousness. Where once a proud warrior looked upon the galaxy through the crisp, tactical displays of a Mark VII helm, there is now only a suffocating nightmare. His vision is violently stained in shades of rusted crimson. Warp static crawls across his mind's eye like swarming insects, hissing with the whispered madness of the immaterium, targeting auspexes twisted by the scrap code of the dark mechanicum, project-hunting runes written in dripping blood. He perceives the world through a lens of absolute hatred, a predatory filter imposed by the never-born entity sharing his metal skin. Desperation seizes the trapped space marine. He tries to scream, but he possesses no throat. He tries to close his eyes, but the sensory feeds are hardwired into his cerebral cortex. He attempts to command this monstrous form to rip the power cables from his own chassis and end the torment. The machine does not obey. Instead, he is forced to watch as his new gargantuan body twitches and flexes completely against his will. Massive hydraulic limbs stretch and shudder as the demon tests the limits of its mechanical flesh. power scourges crack and whir, while the rotary cannons spin with an eager, whining hunger. The loyalist is reduced to a helpless passenger locked inside a prison of screaming iron. The demonic engine is fully awake now, drunk on the raw strength of its armored shell and ravenous for slaughter. Thick chains are hauled tight by mutated thralls as the monstrous war engine is guided toward the deployment bays. Every violent footstep shakes the decking of the warship, echoing the furious acidic rhythm of the reactor. Through eyes he cannot shut, the host sees the jagged maw of a waiting drop pod open wide to receive them. The long descent to the battlefield beckons, entirely at the mercy of the beast that now wears his armor. The umbilical cables sever with the violent suddenness of a guillotine. The Dreadclaw drop pod disengages from the belly of the warship, caught instantly in the brutal gravity well of the planet below. Inside the blackened womb of the descent capsule, the Helbrute is shackled by heavy magnetic clamps. The atmospheric entry begins, bathing the exterior in the scorching fire of friction. Heat bleeds through the adamantium hull, but the physical temperature is nothing compared to the inferno of the pilot within. He is falling toward a bastion of his former brothers. Through his corrupted augers, he sees the massed defensive batteries tracking his plummeting pod. A profound, desperate hope blooms within the shreds of his sanity. He prays to the Emperor he feels he has failed, begging for the heavy Lescanon batteries to find their mark. He yearns for the high-yield crack missile that will shatter his armored sarcophagus and grant him the cold mercy of oblivion. He wants to die. He screams for death, pouring every ounce of his fractured soul into a suicidal plea for release. But this is the ultimate sickening paradox of his entombment. The machine is not just a prison of flesh and ceramite, it is an engine fueled by psychic torment. The warp-tainted engine bound into the iron musculature drinks deeply from this torrent of suicidal despair. It does not allow him to die. Instead, it hijacks his agonizing wish for self-destruction, twisting it through the warp-tainted circuitry until it emerges as pure, apocalyptic hatred. The frantic desire to be unmade is inverted. It becomes a violent, unstoppable compulsion to unmake the universe itself. The closer he falls to the guns that could end his suffering, the more his despair metastasizes into berserker rage. The entity within the metal feeds on his anguish, reaching a critical mass of murderous intent. His internal screaming harmonizes with the deafening roar of the descent engines. The dual cacophony of failing sanity and burning atmosphere fills the cramped darkness. He feels the structural integrity of the drop pod shudder violently as flak bursts detonate against the ablative shielding. Every explosion is a missed promise of peace. Every surviving second is a condemnation to further violence. The demon forces his mechanical hands to clench, priming the brutal weaponry mounted to his massive arms. He is no longer a warrior seeking an honorable end. He is a walking atrocity, a living weapon powered by the very sorrow that begs for the slaughter to cease. The ground rushes up to meet them with terrifying speed. The retro thrusters ignite in a blinding flare of chemical fire, tearing at the sky. The pod slams into the bedrock of the battlefield with the force of a tectonic rupture. The locking clamps disengage with a heavy metallic groan. The assault ramps blast outward, settling into the dust and blood of the front lines. The darkness of the drop pod gives way to the blinding light of total war. Driven by that self-annihilating fury, the monstrous engine heaves its colossal mass forward from the impact crater. To witness the locomotion of a Helbrute is to observe a blasphemy against the very laws of physics and biology. The Dark Mechanicum does not merely forge weapons of iron and plasteel, they cultivate nightmares bound together by a perverse flesh-metal symbiosis. Within the armored sarcophagus, the interred space marine is not a pilot manipulating levers or neurolinks, but a living battery of suffering. Every piston and servo is intimately wired directly into the shattered nervous system of the captive warrior. Thick, pulsing cords of flesh-grafted cabling connect the remnants of his biological form to the cold, warp-tainted chassis. These unholy umbilicals act as living circuitry, bridging the gap between man and machine. With every booming, thundering step the dreadnought takes, the sheer mechanical torque stretches these biological tethers beyond their breaking point. The fleshy tethers violently tear apart inside the amniotic fluid of the pilot chamber. Nerve endings are severed, muscle tissue is shredded, and veins are ripped open in an instant of blinding, unimaginable torment. Yet the warp-infused technology does not allow the host the mercy of bleeding out. In a fraction of a second, sorcerous regeneration forces the torn tissues to violently re-knit. The sinews fuse back together, snapping tight once more, just in time for the next colossal footfall. Movement itself is thus transformed into a perpetual engine of torture. The captive warrior is subjected to the sensation of being flayed and drawn and quartered with every single stride. This cyclical torment is not merely an act of sadistic cruelty, but the foundational operating principle of the war machine. The excruciating pain of torn and healing tissue is instantly harvested by the profane architecture of the sarcophagus. The sheer intensity of the sensory overload is alchemically converted into raw, destructive kinetic energy. The Helbrute literally runs on the continuous rhythmic ripping of its pilot flesh. As the agony spikes, so too does the reactor output, driving the mechanical beast into a deeper, more violent frenzy. It is an abhorrent cycle of suffering fueling destruction and destruction demanding further suffering. Guttural roars of absolute agony broadcast from the Vox grills, drowning out the roar of the artillery overhead. The captive marine screams not in triumph, but in a desperate plea for an end that the machine will never grant him. Each step he commands his iron tomb to tears him apart from the inside, yet the desire to die drives him ever forward. The earth shakes violently as the lumbering terror gathers momentum, crushing both enemy combatants and its own internal biological host with equal devastation. Smoke and blood vent from the exhaust stacks, painting a grisly trail across the scorched earth. The relentless, agonizing charge carries the monstrosity through the swirling dust of the battlefield. Through the haze of war, the fortified trenches of the Imperial defenders finally come into view. Driven by a pain so profound it burns away all reason, the twisted engine breaches the outer perimeter. The screaming, mutilated thing that was once a noble champion now stands poised to unleash its borrowed torment upon those it once called brothers. The monstrous momentum of his tortured advance hurls him directly into the shield wall of the Adeptus Astartes. He crashes through the defensive line in a storm of shattered ceramite and roaring exhaust. These are no nameless foes standing before him. They are his kin. He recognizes the sacred heraldry painted upon their shoulder pauldrons. He knows the litanies of devotion inscribed upon their chest plates. These are the very brothers he bled beside under the light of 1,000 Zeno's suns. Now he is the nightmare they have been deployed to destroy. Inside the amniotic darkness of his sensory deprivation, sarcophagus, the mutilated remnant of a noble warrior, sheds bitter tears of blood and chemical runoff. He screams for the Iron Beast to halt its rampage. the demon engine does not listen. It revels in the supreme humiliation of this fallen hero. Massive hydraulic claws lash out with blurring, impossible speed. He feels the sickening crunch of adamantium and ceramite buckling under his iron grip. The sacred blood of his own family sprays across his visual senses in a hot crimson mist. Every brutal execution is a calculated desecration of his lifelong oaths to the master of mankind. He watches helplessly as his mechanized power, Scourge, tears through the torso of a revered sergeant who once guided his ascension. The noble soul trapped within the ruined meat recoils in absolute, devastating heartbreak. He is forced to be an agonizingly aware passenger in his own personal apocalypse. His corrupted flesh manipulates the weapon systems, but it is the demonic animus that commands the merciless slaughter. He feels the wet tearing of secondary organs and the snapping of fused transhuman ribcages. The machine entity feeds on the pure grief radiating from its captive pilot. It draws unholy strength from the depth of his boundless shame, turning his spiritual agony into kinetic fury. This is a torture far worse than any physical dismemberment ever devised by the ruinous powers. It is the systematic annihilation of his honor and his legacy. He swore unbreakable vows upon the Golden Throne to protect the Imperium from the encroaching darkness. Now he is the monstrous instrument of that very same darkness, reaping the lives of the Emperor's chosen angels. Thick gore drips heavily from his metallic talons as the machine wades deeper into the chaotic fray. The Loyalists rally with desperate courage and train their heavy weapons upon his blasphemous form. He desperately wants them to fire. He begs the cold universe to let their explosive rounds pierce his mutated shell and end this endless misery. Yet the warp-infused plating holds strong against the desperate volley. The relentless slaughter continues unabated, drowning his legacy in an ocean of fraternal blood. Driven to the absolute precipice of madness by the carnage, he gathers the last fractured shreds of his shattered willpower. He looks down at the broken bodies of his kin and attempts to reach out to the warriors still fighting at his feet. He forces his ruined vocal cords to form the words of a warning, a desperate plea for forgiveness, a final apology to the brothers he is butchering. Through the red haze of slaughter, a frantic sliver of the entombed warrior attempts to reach out across the devastated battlefield. Within the suffocating darkness of his amniotic tomb, the fallen brother screams with a voice that possesses no physical breath. He throws the entirety of his shattered will against the corrupted mind impulse units of the war engine. He begs his former battle brothers to raise their melter weapons and turn their lascannons directly upon his desecrated chassis. He pleads for the Devastator squads to lock their targeting reticles onto the twisted sarcophagus that houses his rotting, sensory-deprived flesh. He cries out for the purifying heat of a melter blast to end his eternal torment and grant him the absolute mercy of oblivion. Every synaptic pulse is a desperate prayer for death, a frantic warning transmitted to the very warriors his mechanical claws are currently tearing apart. He channels all his remaining sanity into the communication arrays, desperate to project a single human word through the hull of the monstrosity. Yet the ruinous powers are cruel beyond the measure of mortal comprehension. The ancient neurolinks of the dreadnought have been meticulously corrupted by the dark rituals of chaotic warpsmiths. As the trapped loyalist forces his consciousness into the external auditory arrays, the sheer horror of his reality finally crushes his spirit. He realizes that the external voxcasters do not project his human voice or his tragic lament. Instead, the brass-throated speakers mounted upon the fleshy, mutating hull of the machine erupt with deafening, demonic roars. His desperate begging is violently transmuted through a network of warp-tainted circuitry into a hateful barrage of screeching scrap static. His pathetic pleas for an honorable execution become mocking, synthetic laughter that echoes across the battlefield like shattering glass. The flesh-metal amplifiers distort his misery into a sonic weapon designed to shatter the morale of the Imperium. The Helbrute twists his pure soul into an instrument of profound psychological terror. When he screams the name of the Emperor in a final, anguished bid for salvation, the Vox grills spew forth ancient curses and blasphemous oaths to the dark gods. When he begs his brothers to flee from his unstoppable involuntary wrath, the metallic beast bellows a blood-mad challenge that strikes deep into the hearts of the loyalist defenders. He is trapped within a profane translator of agony that converts his absolute despair into the fanatical battle cries of the great enemy. The loyalist Space Marines hear only the shrieking hatred of a true heretic, completely blind to the imprisoned martyr suffering inside the armored shell. They return fire with righteous fury, but their aim is erratic, disrupted by the sheer terror induced by the unholy, blaring cacophony. The psychic backlash of this forced blasphemy shatters the last remaining bastions of the pilot's fractured sanity. He is forced to watch through blood-smeared pig feeds as his brothers die, believing him to be a willing champion of chaos. The discordant mechanical shrieking continues to broadcast across the local Voxnet, completely drowning out the physical screams of the dying loyalists as the steel behemoth wades deeper into the butchery. The slaughter ends not with a triumphant climax, but with a sickening sudden silence. The demonic machine spirit that shares his metallic tomb finally gorges itself to the point of lethargy. Its infernal furnace cools, receding into the darkest corners of the sarcophagus to digest the psychic agony it has consumed. This is the true zenith of his torment. With the warp-spawned adrenaline fading, the narcotic haze of rage evaporates, leaving nothing but absolute, agonizing clarity. The loyalist is thrust back into the forefront of his own mind, fully aware and entirely helpless. He is a prisoner trapped behind the cold glass of his own optical sensors. A mortal man might squeeze his eyes shut to banish the horrors he has wrought. The entombed dreadnought has no eyelids to close. He is forced to stare through lumen-crisp picked feeds and crimson thermal overlays upon the butchered remnants of his loyal brothers. He sees the ceramite plates he shattered, painted in the heraldry he once swore his life to defend. He beholds the mangled corpses of the very warriors who fought beside him in the Emperor's name, now crushed into unrecognizable ruin by his own mechanical claws. The blood of heroes drips from the spinning teeth of his weaponry. Every ruined face stares blindly back at him, an eternal accusation burned into his cognitive processors. There is no daemon to blame in this moment of devastating silence. The beast is dormant, leaving the Space Marine completely alone to bear the crushing weight of the massacre. Guilt, cold and absolute, floods the amniotic fluid of his casket. He remembers every swing, every crushed skull, every brother who hesitated to fire upon a revered ancient of their chapter. They died because they respected the hero he used to be. He killed them with the brutal efficiency he once reserved for the enemies of mankind. His shattered soul screams out in a silent void, begging the master of mankind for a judgment that will never come. He almost wishes for the demon to return, yearning for the mindless fury to wash away this unbearable lucid nightmare. Instead, he is left to suffocate on his own treason, drowning in the inescapable reality of what his hands have done. Through the lingering smoke of the ruined battlefield, dark shapes begin to emerge. The true masters of the traitor host step over the desecrated dead, their spiked boots grinding down the last remnants of loyalist honor. They converge upon the motionless walker, speaking in guttural commands of the dark tongue. The heretic Astartes prepare their massive chains and sorcerous binding rituals. The battle is won, and they must now secure their living weapon before the warp spasms begin anew. Heavy transport servitors approach to drag the blood-soaked engine back to the waiting fleet. The guns finally fall silent upon the butchered world, leaving the entombed warrior to choke on the ashes of his own forced betrayal. There is no honor to be found in the aftermath. No solemn litanies of victory sung over the broken bodies of his victims. When the masters of the warband arrive to claim their living weapon, they do not come with the reverence afforded to the honored ancients of the Adeptus Astartes. Within the Imperium, a fallen hero encased within a loyalist dreadnought is venerated as a holy relic. He is welcomed back to the chapter shrines with clouds of sacred incense, the chanting of tech priests, and the solemn reverence of his battle brothers. Such an honored veteran is gently coaxed into a dreamless, dignified slumber until the Emperor calls upon his wrath once more. The fate of a Helbrute is a grotesque mockery of this sacred communion. The heretic Astartes who bound him to this iron cage do not revere him. They despise him. More than that, they fear the uncontrollable malice burning within his twisted metal frame. They approach the beast with heavy weapons leveled, driving the monstrosity backward with crackling electrogodes and localized plasma blasts. He is treated not as a brother, but as a rabid, unpredictable attack dog that has outlived its immediate usefulness. Massive, rusted chains are thrown over his colossal shoulders. Each heavy iron link is as thick as a mortal torso, snapping tight to bind his servo-driven limbs and crush his weapons against his chassis. Hooked to grinding winches and brute labor servitors, the roaring sarcophagus is forcibly dragged away from the battlefield. His mechanized protests are ignored. His agonized bellows echo off the shattered ruins as he is hauled bodily into the underbelly of a waiting traitor cruiser. There are no sanctified vaults waiting for him in the heavens above. He is cast down into the lightless, freezing holds of the warship, a desolate oubliette buried deep near the humming reactors. The atmosphere here is thick and poisonous. It suffocates the beast in the ceaseless stench of old, rotting blood and the acrid fumes of void engine exhaust. Brutal iron clamps lock into place with a finalizing crash, shackling his massive frame directly to the trembling bulkhead. The traitors sever his connection to the primary motivators, leaving him physically paralyzed, but horribly, painfully conscious. He is discarded like a rusted blade in a damp cellar, left to fester in the biting cold of the unheated cargo bay until the next cycle of violence requires his release. The heavy iron doors seal shut, plunging the hold into total, suffocating darkness. Deep within the bowels of the ship, the great drives scream to life as the fleet prepares to tear its way back into the Empyrean. Alone in the pitch-black abyss, the chained prisoner can do nothing but scream into the silent dark as the vessel plunges into the maddening tides of the warp. For a loyalist, Astartes, entombed within a venerable dreadnought, the space between wars is an era of sacred slumber. Merciful stasis suspends their ancient minds in peaceful dreams of past glories. But the twisted architects of the dark mechanicum offer no such reprieve to the occupants of a Helbrute. Chained to the rusted bulkhead deep within the bowels of a traitor vessel, the fallen champion realizes his ultimate doom. There is no suspension field to dull his senses. There is no chemical slumber waiting to embrace him. He is left utterly terrifyingly awake. As the corrupted warp drives of the cruiser ignite and tear a bleeding wound into the Empyrean, the true nature of his confinement reveals itself. He is plunged into absolute sensory deprivation. The armored tomb is pitch black, devoid of optical feeds or Auspex telemetry. He possesses no organic eyes to close against the suffocating darkness. He has no hands to clamp over his audial receptors to block out the groaning of the corrupted hull. He is trapped in a state of hyperconscious paralysis. Every waking second is an eternity of unbroken, agonizing awareness. With nothing from the outside world to anchor his mind, his perception turns violently inward. The phantom itch of severed limbs drives him into a silent frenzy. He remembers the exact sensation of his fingers, his legs, his flesh, all of which were brutally amputated to fit his torso into the amniotic casket. He feels them still, burning with spectral agony, desperate to scratch at wounds that no longer exist. Through the alchemical vitae pumping into his ruined spine, the viral scrap code continually sears his neural pathways. It is a ceaseless, crawling fire that denies him even a moment of psychological respite. Yet, the true horror of the dark is the realization that he is not alone. Curled around his soul, intertwined with his life support systems, the dormant intelligence of the dreadnought shares his metal prison. It does not roar, it whispers. A low, grating murmur echoes across the inside of his skull, speaking blasphemies and dark truths that his conditioned mind desperately tries to reject. He cannot silence the voice. He cannot look away from the horrific visions it paints across his mind. The entity feeds on his mounting panic, savoring the slow death of his sanity in the crushing blackness of the hold. There is no dawn or dusk within the warp. Chronological progression ceases to exist in the Empyrean tides. Without the turning of planets or the ticking of standard chronometers, the unblinking prisoner loses all concept of duration. Weeks bleed into months, and months blur into indistinguishable centuries. He is a waking corpse suspended in an ocean of nightmare. With every passing decade, the edges of his glorious past begin to fray. Names of battle brothers fade, the face of his Primarch dissolves into mist. The endless waking dark grinds the very foundation of his soul to dust, leaving only an empty vessel waiting to be filled with wrath. In the lightless depths of the Empyrean, even the most formidable fortresses of the mind must eventually crumble. The psycho-indoctrination forged by the Emperor's own genetic alchemists was designed to be absolute. It was meant to render an Adeptus Astartes immune to terror, resistant to despair, and eternally anchored to his sacred duty. Yet beneath the crushing weight of infinite silent millennia adrift in the warp, this unbreakable conditioning begins to rot. It does not shatter in a single moment of spectacular defiance, but decays through a slow, agonizing erosion of identity. The sensory deprivation of the immaterium strips away the soul, layer by agonizing layer. First to vanish are the quiet memories of a life before the endless war. He tries to recall the color of his homeworld's sky, the scent of its ash or oceans, but finds only a featureless void. Then goes the majestic face of his gene-sire, the Primarch who once filled his dual hearts with unparalleled devotion. The sacred oaths he swore in the echoing halls of his chapter monastery dissolve into meaningless, fragmented echoes. He reaches into the blackness for the golden light of the Master of Mankind, desperately seeking the guiding beacon of terror, but the relentless darkness swallows it whole. The noble champion of humanity is hollowed out, his history devoured by the sheer, overwhelming volume of his trauma. What remains in the vacuum of his mind is quickly filled by the visceral horrors of his entombment. He can no longer remember his own name, nor the faces of the battle brothers he bled beside on 100 forgotten worlds. His entire universe is reduced to the blinding agony of severed nerve endings and the cold intrusion of corrupted cybernetics. He remembers only the shrieking bite of the butcher's saw as it amputated his shattered limbs to fit him into this nightmare. He remembers the suffocating pressure of the amniotic casket and the foul, coppery taste of demonic blood pumped directly into his starving veins. Every noble virtue that once defined his existence is systematically replaced by sheer agony. Honor becomes an Xenos, incomprehensible concept. Brotherhood and sacrifice are revealed as bitter, cruel jests played upon the blindly loyal. The hero who fought with righteous fury against the dying of the light is truly and finally dead. There is no glorious martyrdom to be found inside this suffocating sarcophagus. His conscious mind is a rotting corpse locked within a tomb of screaming metal. Yet the flesh refuses to perish, artificially sustained by dark sorceries and the foul energies of the abyss. From the ashes of his shattered psyche, something horrifying is forced into being. It is a creature entirely devoid of reason, compassion, or noble allegiance. The loyal Space Marine is replaced by a raw, vibrating engine of continuous, unbroken hatred. This malice is pure and absolute, directed at the traitors who enslaved him, at the emperor who abandoned him, and at the cruel universe that allowed such profound torment to endure. His sanity is nothing but ash, leaving only a ravenous hunger for violence to fill the hollow shell of his ruined humanity. What remains when the soul is ground into dust is a dark miracle of the ruinous powers. The noble Adeptus Astartes, once a beacon of humanity, is entirely dead. In his place stands a hollow shell of boundless, untethered madness. Yet the greatest tragedy of the Helbrute is not the death of the warrior, but his inability to truly perish. This is the flawless curse of immortality. Within the roiling tides of the Eye of Terror, time bends and fractures, stretching a single moment of agonizing clarity into a sprawling eternity. To live within the embrace of chaos is not to survive, but to suffer infinitely. The mutated flesh does not wither, and the rusted neural cables do not snap. They merely pulse with an endless cycle of torment, feeding the remains of the pilot a sickening cocktail of warp-infused combat stims and pure, undiluted hatred. Every waking second is a masterclass in sensory violation. The sarcophagus is no longer a life support system meant to preserve a fallen hero. It is a claustrophobic execution chamber where the executioner never permits the axe to fall. Inside this metallic tomb, there are no lingering dreams of past glory or fading memories of a golden age. There is only a continuous, centuries-long scream echoing endlessly against the cold, adamantium walls. The corrupted machine spirit and the shattered mortal mind have fused into a wretched singularity of pain. The creature is completely unable to distinguish where its bruised flesh ends and the weeping iron begins. Every grind of its massive servos is a physical cry for mercy. Every thunderous footstep is an act of sheer, unadulterated malice born of inescapable misery. The dark gods do not grant their fallen champions the quiet dignity of oblivion. They preserve them carefully, keeping them as eternal prisoners, trapped deep within their own augmented bodies. Thus, the Helbrute must be understood as something profoundly more terrifying than a mere siege engine or a brutal vanguard of slaughter. It is the ultimate monument to the desecration of imperial purity. It stands as a physical, bleeding manifestation of everything the master of mankind fought to prevent. It is a grotesque parody of the sacred dreadnoughts that proudly march in his holy name across the stars. Where the loyalist ancient serves with honor, reverence, and intermittent slumber, the Helbrute serves only as a feral beast chained to the cruel whims of bitter warlords and sadistic demon-smiths. It is a walking blasphemy, a cathedral of twisted flesh and jagged steel, erected solely to mock the resilience of the human spirit. As the fires of war finally burn down to embers and the traitor legions retreat into the weeping tears of the warp, the silence of the blackened battlefield is broken by a sound that chills the blood of mortals. It is the guttural, mechanical roar of the Helbrute. It howls into the empty void, thrashing against its iron chains, violently begging for a death that will never arrive. The righteous warrior within is gone forever, swallowed by the dark, chained eternally to the altar of endless slaughter. For this shattered abomination, there is no salvation, no grand forgiveness, and no final release. He is forever denied the Emperor's peace.